Hello, everybody. Thanks for being with us here today. I'm Sarah, this is Alex, and this is Anmol. And this year we had the privilege of conducting our capstone research with the editors and journalists of the Seattle Times. We believe that local news is vital for communities. And in the Pacific Northwest, the Seattle Times covers the region with a local expertise that cannot be matched by national organizations. But young readers are not investing in subscriptions with the Seattle Times. Seattleites in their 20s and 30s mostly get their news through digital formats, and information saturation is compromising their ability to develop relationships with specific news sources. Now, the Seattle Times cares deeply about creating meaningful engagement for a broader audience, but doesn't feel it currently has the resources that it needs to do so. As we began to conduct interviews with the Seattle Times staff, this came up again and again. The Seattle Times doesn't feel it understands the needs of young readers to the point where it can create the incentives for them to invest in the paper. The Seattle Times needs a communication channel with young readers, and we set out to create this with our research. We discovered that mobile news formats are critically mismatched with the experience that young readers want to be able to have with the news. Endless scrolls, too many news source options, and information overload make it difficult for young readers to even get to the point where they can have a positive experience with a news article. And in the meantime, journalists can only advocate for the interests of young readers if they have some way of figuring out what those are. So we designed Impact. It's a mobile news app for the Seattle Times, and it turns the customization of the news experience into a conversation between journalists and readers.
I want to know what's going on in my city, how it impacts me, and how it impacts my community. There's a lot of news out there, and I don't always have the time to find what matters to me on different days. But the Seattle Times has an app to help. This is how I get my local news now, every day. I share my interests, and the app brings me today's 10 most relevant stories. At the end of my 10 stories, I get a summary of what's next. On busy days, I usually stop there. On really busy days, I skip straight to the summary. But when I have the time, I love to keep reading. I read that one of my favorite Seattle music venues was shutting down, so I wrote to the Times saying how important this story was. This matters to me and my friends. That night, we were all talking about it. And then, the Seattle Times wrote back. So Impact isn't just a customized news experience. It's about being a part of bringing great news to our city. Impact helps us find what matters together with the Seattle Times. And that's worth coming back to every day.
So our design was deeply inspired by the experience of reading a print newspaper, which from our research we learned that young readers do really love to do. They like having a beginning and an end and being able to explore in the center of this content, understanding their place in the mix. They also enjoy the serendipity of receiving new collections of articles every day. Now, Alex is going to talk you through how we did this for digital.
All right, thanks, Sarah. So now I'll be walking through the three main scenarios which we focused upon when building our application. The first scenario came from our research and observations, which was that millennials don't usually have that much time to read. And when they do, it's only for about 5 to 15 minutes. Like Nam here, who's picking up his friend and has a few unexpected minutes to read. With this in mind, we designed the very first screen you see when coming into our application to be the preview of an article selected based on your interest. Every preview contains the article headline as well as the main points. To switch between previews, you can swipe left or right. If you're super short on time, you can tap into our summary screen, which we developed, which contains the summaries of articles you haven't read, as well as articles that are coming up next. Now for those situations when you have a bit more time to read and feel like reading full articles, like Nam in this situation, who's out on his lunch break and wants to catch up on the news, you can do so by finding the article preview that you want to read more about and scroll down. You can also now mark the story as impactful if you find it interesting, or you want to send feedback to the authors. The final scenario is where you have a ton of time to read, like Nam in this situation, who's at Green Lake relaxing after work on a Friday. In this case, Nam has finished all of the stories we've provided for him based on his interests, and still wants to read more. In this situation, we've provided you with the summaries of articles outside of your interests, as well as articles that others have marked impactful on our summary screen, so you can choose whether you want to read more or not. And now to Anmol, who will present our personalization.
So we offer personalization, and we do this using human-centered machine learning. What do we mean when we say human-centered machine learning, and how did we get here? We know that every reader is different, and to be able to understand our readers in depth, we used a very interesting qualitative research method called cultural probe kits. Each kit had 6 very unique activities, focused on understanding specific information-seeking behavior and needs of our millennials. What are the perks of using such a method? So the way our participants perceived these kits were as these fun info games, very approachable. So that really helped them step out of their comfort zone and give us very genuine and authentic responses. When we took these boxes back to the Times, our journalists really appreciated and valued getting to learn about their readers in depth. And that's when we realized that we could actually have a strong communication channel between the two groups. And that's how our feature, the impactful feedback feature, was born. So like I mentioned before, every reader is different. And in order to be able to cater to these different needs, we allow our readers to enter custom keywords, select from predefined categories, and additionally, also select how their stories get decided on a day-to-day basis. So this is done using 3 methods: the editor's pick, as shown above there. Then we have the topics variety. So the topics variety uses fuzzy clustering semi-supervised machine learning that we'll come to in a bit. And finally, we have the third, which uses collaborative filtering, which is an algorithm that Spotify and Netflix use. And the way it works is it picks articles from other similar user profiles and what they consider to be impactful. So our journalists at the Times really want to offer personalized experiences. But one problem that they face is the amount of time that they need to invest. But that's exactly where our algorithm steps in, the fuzzy clustering semi-supervised machine learning algorithm. What is it and how does it work? So it basically collects all the articles, after which it removes all stop words, such as prepositions, post which it does word stemming. For example, words like walking become walk, and then word vectorization. Finally, it uses parameters like term frequency and inverse document frequency, which mean how much a word is getting repeated in an article, what is the weight of a word in an article, to finally make clusters and categorize these articles into the user's selected topics. So on a day-to-day basis, we offer relevant curation, which is not too limited and specific. And on an ongoing basis, we allow the journalists to get feedback from you, our readers, so that they can better your experience every day. We, Team Impact, understand that today there's a lot of negativity in this space of journalism. And after doing our research, talking to our participants, our journalists, we know that the problem stems from miscommunication and misunderstanding. So that's exactly where we want to step in and help them build a healthy relationship, a bond, so they can understand each other better. On this note, I'd like to conclude and thank our amazing sponsors, Frank and Thomas at the Seattle Times, our entire team at the Seattle Times, our research experts, as well as MHCI+T staff, professors, our amazing mentors, all our peers for supporting us at every step of this wonderful journey. Thank you.